All right, let's talk about Eddard III. Eddard III is, of course, just a basic continuation of Sansa, though it happens an almost unbelievable 4 days later. By the way, this chapter is only about 2,300 words. The Sansa chapter was relatively long for a Game of Thrones at 5,000 words. Later on, 5,000 word chapters become pretty norm, but in a Game of Thrones, the chapters are much shorter. So 5,000 words is one of the longer ones, while Eddard III is one of the shorter. And after the break, I will say the 13, 14 chapter break that George had for a couple of years, he does come back with a lot of these chapters are very action oriented, and a lot of stuff happens that's maybe not that believable. It's not that believable that both Arya and Micah are allowed to go off riding on their own for half a day. And here and then Sansa and Joffrey are allowed to go off riding alone for half a day, and they happen to run into each other and happen to run into each other at a particular moment when Arya and Micah are fighting. Here again, there's a lot of conveniences for the plot, which is, plots need conveniences, fiction needs conveniences, but you'll see as we go through this that a lot of the things that happen are a little ridiculous, and how characters react is a little ridiculous. I think the thing that a lot of people have trouble with this chapter is that Sansa is somehow fine with Cersei killing Lady, and puts all of the blame on, I guess, Arya, but continues to look up to Cersei, which is hard to believe. It's hard to believe that someone could order the killing of your dog and you'd be fine with them. That's probably one of the most notable, but there's a few other little things in here that are just weird. Though we all remember this chapter. It's the chapter that makes us really kind of hate Cersei for killing Lady. Makes her a bit of a villain. Even more so than pushing Bran from a window, right? That somehow the killing of Lady is almost seen as even crueler. Anyway, Eddard. They found her, my lord. Ned rose quickly. Our men or Lannisters? It was Jory, his steward Van Poole replied. She's not been harmed. Jory is, the ultimate loyal man. Van Poole, he eventually just disappears from the story. We assume he died, but he just kind of disappears in King's Landing. Obviously, Jane Poole's father, and then Jory is, Roderick's nephew and Beth Cassell's cousin. Thank the gods, Ned said. His men had been searching for Arya for 4 days. But the Queen's men had been out hunting as well. Now, what did you think about that? Arya and Micah and Nymeria are out in the wilderness for 4 days being hunted, and no one finds them. And they're not together. Micah is somewhere else, and Arya is with Nymeria. And Jorah finds Arya, and the Hound finds Micah on roughly the same day after 4 days. Like, what Arya ate, how she survived in the wilderness for 4 days, we do not know. And why it took them 4 days when they were a half day's ride, we don't know. We also know that it's been retconned that, later on we add that Jaime was out searching too, and that he would perhaps have killed Arya if he found her, because notably Jaime is missing from this chapter. I'm sorry, my lord, Poole told him. The guards on the gate were Lannister men, and they informed the Queen when Jory brought her in. She's been taken directly before the king. Damn that woman, Ned said, striding to the door. Find Sansa and bring her to the audience chamber. Her voice may be needed. He descended the tower steps in a red rage. He had led searches himself for the first 3 days, and had scarcely slept an hour since Arya had disappeared. This morning, he had been so heartsick and weary he could scarcely stand. But now his fury was on him, filling him with strength. Interestingly enough, he and this is the funny thing about like siding with people. Like for 4 days, he saw like Joffrey's mangled arm, and for 4 days, he's just assumed that Arya had not done something bad to Joffrey. That Joffrey was somehow lying or something. That he's a lot of parents immediately assume that their children are guilty of something, but Ned doesn't do that at all. Men called out to him as he crossed the castle yard, but Ned ignored them in his haste. He would have run, but he was still the king's hand, and a hand must keep his dignity. He was aware of the eyes that followed him, of the muttered voices wondering what he would do. The castle was a modest holding of a half-day's ride south of the Trident. The royal party had made themselves the uninvited guests of its lord, Sir Raymond Derry. While the hunt for Arya and the butcher's boy was conducted on both sides of the river, they were not welcome visitors. Man, these guys... I mean, keep in mind, this is the same crew of people that went out hunting with with Ned and Robert up at Winterfell. I mean, they have hounds. They couldn't find these kids. They couldn't find these kids, or a direwolf. Couldn't find them. The royal party had made themselves uninvited guests. They were not welcome visitors. Sir Raymond lived under the king's peace, but his family had fought beneath Rhaegar's dragon banners at the Trident, and his 3 older brothers had died there. A truth neither Robert nor Sir Raymond had forgotten. And of course, later, there's the story that Jaime brings up about pulling out the dragon banners in the basement and things like that on the way up. And his 3 older brothers had died there, but truth neither Robert nor Raymond had forgotten. With King's men, Derry men, Lannister men, and Stark men all crammed into a castle far too small for them, tensions burned hot and heavy. Now, interestingly, that he does choose Derry as the place where this all happens. We're first introduced to Derry in the words of Viserys. So it seems from the beginning that George wanted House Derry to be a big, important player. They never really, hit that level, right? I mean, they're here and there, but he has them die out and things like that. But the king had appropriated Sir Raymond's audience chamber, and that was where Ned found them. The room was crowded when he burst in. Too crowded, he thought. Left alone, he and Robert might have been able to settle the matter amicably. I mean, it's an interesting thing that he's bringing up, the fact that Viserys definitely says that Derry is going to support them, and then from the other side, he mentions that Derry were supporters of the Targaryens. And so Derry just kind of watches this whole thing go down. You wonder from the idea that these Targaryen supporters are watching the Starks and the Lannisters and the Baratheons all consume each other, and waiting for the return of Daenerys or whoever. Robert was slumped in Derry's high seat at the far end of the room, his face closed and sullen. Cersei Lannister and her son stood beside him. The queen had her hand on Joffrey's shoulder. Thick silken bandages covered the boy's arm. Arya stood in the center of the room, alone, but for Jory Cassel, every eye upon her. "Arya!" Ned called loudly. He went to her, his boots ringing on the stone floor. When she saw him, she cried out and began to sob. She must be hungry. For 4 days. Ned went to one knee and took her in his arms. She was shaking. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry. I know." She felt so tiny in his arms, nothing but a scrawny little girl. It was hard to see how she had caused so much trouble. "Are you hurt?" It was hard to see how she caused so much trouble. I mean, the mangled arm right there. No, her face was dirty and her tears left pink tracks down her cheeks. "Hungry some. I ate some berries, but there was nothing else." 4 days of berries. We'll feed you soon enough, Ned promised. He rose to face the king. What is the meaning of this? His eyes swept the room, searching for friendly faces. But for his own men, there were few enough. Sir Raymond Derry guarded his look well. So he's just watching. Lord Renly wore half a smile that might mean anything. And old Sir Barristan was grave. The rest were Lannister men and hostile. Their only good fortune was that both Jaime Lannister and Senator Clegane were missing, leading searches north of the Trident. Why was I not told my daughter had been found? Ned demanded, his voice ringing. Why was she not brought to me at once? He spoke to Robert, but it was Cersei Lannister who answered. How dare you speak to your king in that manner? At that, the king stirred. Quiet, woman, he snapped. He straightened in his seat. I'm sorry, Ned. I never meant to frighten the girl. It seemed best to bring her here to get the business done with quickly. And what business is that? Ned put ice in his voice. The queen stepped forward. You know full well, Stark. This girl of yours attacked my son. Her and her butcher's boy. The animal of hers tried to tear his arm off. That's not true, Arya said loudly. She just bit him a little. He was hurting Micah. Now, they did use the word mangled. So I don't know, how it's not just bite him a little. These are huge wolves, but, Joff told us what happened. You and your butcher's boy beat him with clubs while you set a wolf on him. That's not how it was, Arya said, close to tears again. Ned put his hand on her shoulder. Yes, it is, Joffrey insisted. They attacked me. She threw Lion's Tooth in the river. Ned noticed that he did not so much glance at Arya as he spoke. Liar! She did attack him. And the wolf did too. And she did throw Lion's Tooth in the river. Maybe Micah didn't attack, but, Shut up, the prince yelled back. Enough, the king roared, rising to his seat, his voice thick with irritation. Silence fell. This is what's very funny about the story. The true crime of Joffrey in this situation is that he was going to kill Micah, or he was going to harm or maim Micah, who did nothing to deserve it. But it's interesting how Micah is not brought up. He's not brought up by Arya here that we know of. He's not brought up by Sansa that we know of. He's not brought up by Joffrey that we know of. We don't actually know the stories that they tell, but it's so fun. But what's interesting in this dispute among Highborn is how little Micah plays a role. And that's the really fascinating thing, especially in these early chapters, again, where George is so focused on the class warfare, and then that story kind of disappears. But the tragedy here is this tragedy of this whole incident is Micah. Arya kind of does remember that and holds it in her. But, even the reader is like, oh, poor lady, we remember Lady's death. Micah's the innocent person that dies. Like, Lady's a dog. Lady is a wolf. Lady's a dog, Micah's a human being. And it's amazing how little care is given by all the characters to Micah. Arya cares. But it's very interesting that he just doesn't factor into it. He doesn't factor into the stories. He doesn't factor into the crimes. So when she, now, child, you'll tell me what happened. Tell it all and tell it true. It's a great lie great crime to lie to a king. And then he looked over his son. When she is done, you'll have your turn. Until then, hold your tongue. Now, here is the king. The king is sitting in judgment. This is a big kind of deal about the king. This is what kings and lords used to do. They would sit in judgment. Well, people brought cases before them. Robert apparently hates doing this, and he's apparently kind of bad at it. He just wants everything over and done with. He doesn't like the business of being a king. He doesn't like the delivering justice or thinking about it. It makes him very uncomfortable. So as Arya began her story, Ned heard the door behind him. He glanced back and saw Van Poole enter with Sansa. They stood quietly at the back of the hall as Arya spoke. When she got to the part where she threw Joffrey's sword in the middle of the trident, Renly Baratheon began to laugh. The king bristled. Sir Barristan, escort my brother from the hall before he chokes. Lord Renly stifled his laughter. My brother is too kind. I can find the door myself. He bowed to Joffrey. Perchance later, you'll tell me how a 9-year-old girl the size of a wet rat managed to disarm you with a broom handle and throw your sword in the river. As the door swung shut behind him, Ned heard him say, lion's tooth, and guffaw once more. Now, think about this. Now, we don't know Arya's tale. We don't know it at all. We know that something's left out because he says, perchance later tell me how a 9-year-old girl managed to disarm you. Well, we know how it happened. She whacked him in the back of the head really hard. She sucker hit him until his head, his head was bleeding. And Joffrey kind of told that story. So I imagine that Arya must have not had it in her story or something. It's a little weird that he's like, tell me how a 9-year-old girl disarmed you. Well, Joffrey already did tell that. He said they beat him with clubs, which is more or less true. Like they hit him hard at the back of the head, like when he wasn't looking. So then the aspect of Arya's story, which again we don't hear. I imagine that Arya said that he was trying to hurt Micah. But it's amazing that aspect of it doesn't go into Renly's reaction. Like, Renly is not upset that Joffrey was abusing a small boy, a 14-year-old boy, and was cutting his face and being psychotic. That isn't the thing to laugh at. That isn't the thing to be upset about. What's upsetting is that a girl bested him. So that's what's kind of screwed up. Like, even Renly is really screwed up. And keep in mind that, like, Ned doesn't bring up Micah. Joffrey doesn't bring him up. Sansa doesn't bring him up. Like, he's just not, like, Micah is just not brought up. This is something to laugh at. This is something to laugh at. A girl disarmed you. Not, you're a bad person because you were psychotically cutting a boy's face, It's very, very weird. Again, like, it's how little the small folk matter. How little the small folk matter. It's just astounding when you reread this, thinking about Micah. Prince Joffrey was pale and began his very different version of events. When his son was done talking, the king rose heavily from his seat, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere but here. What in all seven? Now, I think the assumption on the first read is that Arya tells the truth and Joffrey lies. But we actually already heard Joffrey's tale, that he was beaten with clubs and the direwolf was set on him. That's, it's more or less true. The lie is the lie of omission, that he was torturing Micah. That's the worst part. What's strange is the very different version of events. Like, what on earth was Arya saying? Did she completely, like, eliminate the fact that she was doing sword play with Micah? Like, what was the version that she told that was so different from Joffrey's? Because Joffrey's version, although there's the omission about torturing Micah, it's more or less true. So I do wonder what Arya's version was, because if it's very different, Arya's version must be very much a lie. So it's strange. It's strange, but it's strange that Micah doesn't even come here, And then he says, "What in seven hells am I supposed to make of this?" He says one thing, she says another. What were those two different tales? We don't know. We don't know what Arya's tale was. They were not the only ones present, Ned said. Sansa, come here. Ned had heard her version of the story the night Arya had vanished. He knew the truth. What was Sansa's version? Tell us what happened. The eldest daughter stepped forward. She was dressed in blue velvets, trimmed with white, a silver chain around her neck. Her thick auburn hair had been brushed until it shone. She blinked at her sister, then at the young prince. I don't know, she said tearfully, looking as though she wanted to bolt. I don't remember. Everything happened so fast. I didn't see. So Sansa's version, at least Ned thinks is the truth. He never says Arya's version is the truth, by the way. I wish we had, I really do wish we had like the actual testimony of Joffrey, Arya, and Sansa on what they said. You rotten, Arya shrieked. She flew at her sister like an arrow, knocking Sansa down to the ground, pummeling her. Liar, 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 liar. Arya, stop it. Jorah pulled her off her sister, kicking. Sansa was pale and shaking, and Ned lifted her back to her feet. Are you hurt? He asked. But she was staring at Arya. And she did not seem to hear. The girl is as wild and filthy as her animal of hers, Cersei Lannister said. Robert, I want her punished. 7 hells, Robert swore. Cersei, look at her. She's a child. What would you have me do? Whip her through the streets? Damn it. Children fight. It's over. No lasting harm was done. Again, Robert's judgment is a little rough here. Rough in a bad, in the sense that it's just not very good. I mean, the no lasting harm was done. I mean, it's Joffrey did have his hand mangled, and Joffrey was torturing a boy. There should be some punishments. The queen was furious. Joff will carry those scars for the rest of his life. Robert Baratheon looked at his eldest son. So he will. Perhaps they will teach him a lesson. Ned, see that your daughter is disciplined. I will do the same with my son. I mean, if there is discipline what is the discipline? And what is Joffrey guilty of? Renly thinks Joffrey is guilty of losing to a girl. Do you think Robert Baratheon disciplined his son for the torture of Micah? It's funny, like what Joffrey's crime is. It's not even mentioned, because I think they all think his crime was losing in a fight to a girl. Because again, he says he thinks the issue is children fight. It's not really the issue, right? The issue here is that Joffrey was psychotically torturing a boy, and Arya has a wild wolf. None of those things are dealt with. Gladly, Your Grace, Ned said with vast relief. Robert started to walk away, but the queen was not done. And what of this direwolf? She called after him. What of the beast that savaged your son? The king stopped, turned back, frowned. I've forgotten about the damned wolf. Ned could see Arya tense in Jory's arm. Jory spoke up quickly. We found no trace of the direwolf, Your Grace. Later we find out that Jory very cleverly knew something bad was going to happen in Nymeria, so he helped Arya shoo it away. So Jory is and so here he's lying here, but this is Jory being loyal to the bone to Arya. A real it's one of these good things that, of course, they're building up Jory to be this great person, because we all know Jory's fate. Robert did not look happy. No? So be it. The queen raised her voice. 100 golden dragons to the man who brings me its skin. A costly pelt, Robert grumbled. I want no part of this woman. You can damn well buy your furs with Lannister gold. The queen regarded him coolly. I had not thought you so niggardly. The king I'd thought to wed would have laid a wolfskin across my bed before the sunset went down. Robert's face darkened with anger. That would be a fine trick without a wolf. We have a wolf. Cersei Lannister said. Her voice was quiet, but her green eyes shone with triumph. And here is this interesting thing about this scene, because of what it tells us about Cersei. Cersei is here just being vindictive, and it's not even necessarily being like. And I do wonder if she would have been vindictive, had Robert not taunted her. Like, he's saying you don't have a wolf skin. You know, Robert's taunt to her is that you don't have a wolf skin. And so Cersei wants a wolf skin now. But it's very odd when I mean, again, Cersei's crazy, right? But this idea that we can punish Arya by killing Lady, which is really weird, right? Like, yes, Arya is going to care tangentially about Lady, but Sansa's the one that cares about Lady, and Sansa didn't do anything wrong. It's almost like, you know, is she just punishing the Starks collectively, or is she trying to get back at Robert because of the comment that you're not going to have a wolf's pelt? And she's like, well, I want a wolf's pelt. There might not be a very good logic to it. It's a strange illogical level of vindictiveness that Cersei has here, but Cersei is crazy. But you know, it's an interesting what if about like, what if Robert hadn't made these jokes, and would Cersei have wanted to kill Lady? It took them all a moment to comprehend her words, but when they did, the king shrugged irritably. As you will, have Sir Ilyn see to it. Robert, you cannot mean this, Ned protested. The king was in no mood for argument. Enough, Ned. I will hear no more. A direwolf is a savage beast. Sooner or later, it would have turned on your girl the same way the other did on my son. Get her a dog. She'll be happier for it. Robert is correct here, but he's doing it for the wrong reason. Robert is correct. These wolves have no place here. They should have been released out into the wild. People should not be keeping them as pets. Robert is correct. However, he's only calling for the execution of Lady to be done with the argument with Cersei. You know, he's essentially having Lady executed for the wrong reasons. That was when Sansa finally seemed to comprehend. Her eyes were frightened as they went to her father. He doesn't mean Lady, does he? She saw the truth on his face. No, she said. No, not Lady. Lady didn't bite anybody. She's good. Lady wasn't there. Arya shouted angrily. You leave her alone. And here we see a little bit of Stark Arya teaming up with her sister finally. Stop them, Sansa pleaded. Don't let them do it. Please, please, please. It wasn't Lady. It was Nymeria. Arya did it. You can't. It was Lady. Don't let her hurt Lady. I'll make her good. I promise. I promise. She started to cry. And of course, this is the promise is of course this is of course a reference to Lyanna and someone pleading to Ned about the promise. And this, I think this is is this the first time we have to, let me see here. Cause it's certainly, yeah. Oh, no. In Eddard II is the first time we hear "Promise me, Ned," she had whispered. So, but nonetheless, someone pleading to Ned, I promise, you know, is of course like bringing Ned back to Lyanna here. All Ned could do was take her in his arms and hold her while she wept. He looked across the room at Robert, his old friend, closer to any brother. Please, Robert, for the love you bear me, for the sake you bore my sister, please. And of course, right there, sister comes to mind. So of course. The king looked for a long moment, then he turned his eyes on his wife. Damn you, Cersei, he said with loathing. And again, it's like, It's really an argument between Robert and Cersei, this whole thing. Ned stood, gently disengaging himself from Sansa's grasp. All the wariness of the past 4 days had returned to him. Do it yourself then, Robert, he said in a voice cold and sharp as steel. At least have the courage to do it yourself. Robert looked at Ned with flat, dead eyes and left without a word, his footsteps heavy as lead. Silence filled the hall. And this gets into this, this of course brings back Ned's idea that if you can't look somebody in the eye and hear your last words, maybe you shouldn't be the one doing the execution. Robert is not one that can do that, apparently. And so that's this big thing. And of course, this is going to come later because, Robert is going to call for the execution of Daenerys from far away by some other person's hand. And, this is all bringing in this idea. Ned really has this belief that somehow if you do the killing yourself, that it's all fine, but there's, of course, a lot of problems considering that, Garrett shouldn't have been executed. So it's a lot of bad executions, a lot of people getting executed that don't deserve it. So in a long line. So Garrett, the first, Lady is our second, the innocent being killed. Where's the direwolf? Cersei asked when her husband was gone. Beside her, Prince Joffrey was smiling. Again, this weird vindictiveness in Joffrey too. This isn't the wolf that mauled him, and it's not Arya's wolf, but somehow this is some sort of weird victory for them because they're insane, because they're petty and vindictive and insane. The beast is chained up outside the gatehouse, Your Grace, Sir Barristan Selmy answered reluctantly. Send for ill and pain. No, Ned said. Jory, take the girls back to their rooms and bring me ice. The words tasted of bile in his throat, but he forced them out. If it must be done, I will do it. Cersei Lannister regarded him suspiciously. You, Stark, is this some trick? Why would you do such a thing? They were all staring at him, but it was Sansa's look that cut. She is of the North. She deserves better than a butcher. Poor Ilan Payne. Now he's just a butcher. But here's the funny thing, though. Again, we know that Micah is butchered, and the butcher's boy, right? And he didn't deserve what he got. And all of this time and sadness is given to Lady, a wolf, like a dog. And so little time is given to Micah. And it's so obvious here when you go on reread going, what about Micah? What about Micah? He left the room with his eyes burning and his daughter's wails echoing in his ears, and he found the direwolf pup where they chained her. In a sense, Micah is actually the punished. Arya is punished in the end, because Micah is the one that's killed. So he left the room with his eyes burning and his daughter's wails echoing in his ears, and he found the direwolf pup where they chained her. Ned sat beside her for a while. Lady, he said, tasting the name. He had never paid much attention to the names that the children had picked, but looking at her now, he knew that Sansa had chosen well. She was the smallest of the litter, the prettiest, the most gentle and trusting. She looked at him with bright golden eyes and ruffled her thick gray fur. Shortly, Jory brought him ice. And of course, what does this symbolically mean? Lady is traditional femininity and all of the things that come with the patriarchy and Sansa believing in it. And the idea is what does it actually get you in the end? In this story going forward, we do kind of see that everything starts falling apart. The patriarchy starts falling apart as the story goes on. The characters stop believing in the system. Lady dying here it's certainly Sansa still keeps believing in the system for a long time, but it's the beginning of things. It's the beginning that The traditional roles of women are dead is the idea here. I think this is what George is saying, that we clearly had Nymeria and Lady in juxtaposition, and Lady dies. And who is left? Who is left? Nymeria. Growing in power and power. Unstoppable, really. She looked at him with the bright golden eyes and ruffled her thick fur. Shortly, George brought her ice. When it was over, he said, "Choose 4 men and take her body north. Bury her at Winterfell." "All that way," Jory said, astonished. "All that way," Ned affirmed. "The Lannister woman shall never have this skin." And from it sounds like Cersei really wanted this skin, so Cersei's gonna be upset. She's gonna be like, "Where? That was the whole point, that I had the thing killed so I could one up Robert." He was walking back to the tower to give himself up to sleep at last when Sandor Clegane and his riders came pounding through the castle gate, back from their hunt. There was something slung over the back of his destrier, a heavy shape wrapped in a bloody cloak. "No sign of your daughter, Hand," the hound rasped down. "But the day was not wholly wasted. We got her little pet." He reached back and shoved the burden off, and it fell with a thump in front of Ned. Bending, Ned picked back the cloak, dreading the words he would have to find for Arya. But it was not Nymeria after all. It was the butcher's boy, Micah, his body covered in dried blood. He had been cut almost in half from shoulder to waist by some terrible blow struck from above. "You rode him down," Ned said. The hound eyes seemed to glitter through the steel of that hideous dog head helm. He ran. He looked at Ned's face and laughed, but not very fast. And so, and that's the other thing of like what the hound represents. We kind of know that the hound represents like, for lack of a better word, toxic masculinity, like all the bad aspects of this like society obsessed with manliness. Sandor was abused when he was a kid because he was playing with a toy, and to make him to harden him, his face is shoved into a fire by the mountain, and he becomes hard. He becomes hardened, supposedly. I mean, emotionally underneath, he's still a wreck. But that hound's head represents all of that. And that hound's head is later, plays an important role later in the Brienne story and things like this. But it's hard. It's hard to not see the very clear statements about the role of sex and gender in the society, with Lady, what happens to Lady, and the role of Lady, and what happened, and the hound here at the end. But again, like Micah, poor Micah. I mean, granted, they couldn't bring up Micah because then it ruins the surprise at the end. But it's amazing how little they care about him. Even Ned is like, "Oh gosh, what am I going to do to tell her about this wolf? Oh, it's actually the boy." Anyway, this is that was Eddard III. A short one, and we'll continue on next time with Bran. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.